I want to show you how we're going to be using cold mold to make some possibilities for reproductions of things in metal clay. So you can do this two different ways. You can do a one-part mold, which is flat on one side, and then it takes whatever the impression is on the front. That is one way of doing this. So if you don't mind there being something flat on the back side and you've got whatever your intention is pressed into the mold, then that's going to be appropriate. So like things like spoons, if you want to do a spoon ring. If you don't mind that one side is going to be flat and the other side is going to have the texture, you can do that. I did that with something a long time ago. So this is one where it's flat on the other side. It may have some fingerprints, from where you were pressing it into the mold, but this is just something that I did a long, long time ago. So that is a possibility. But you can also do a two-part mold, which I'm going to attempt with this part of a spoon today. But I want to show you how to do a one-part mold. And like I said, so this is what I did with these cicada wings. So these cicada wings were slip on a natural object. So I had these cicada wings that I wanted to make out of silver. And then I wanted to make some duplicates of them. So that is what I'm going to be doing, but I wanted to do it in different metals. So now I can make an endless supply of reproductions of these wings if I wanted to. You're going to need the cold mold. So you've got cold mold here. You need your object, whatever it is that you're going to be making an impression of. I'm going to do this little skate. So this is what I'm going to make a one-part mold of. I did this, I carved it a while ago, and I want to make some duplicates of it. It's got some inscription on the back, which I would love to duplicate, but for right now, I'm just going to do a one-part mold. So that just means that the front side is going to get pressed into the cold mold, and then the back side, whatever I just, when I decide to make some reproductions of it, the back side will be flat. What you need is enough cold mold to, when it's doubled, because you're going to do this in two parts, when it's doubled, it's going to make enough so that it can take the impression of this little thing here. So you have to be very careful because you want to make sure you have enough. Then you're also going to need something like the top part of a container, so plastic, something like that. But this is smooth, so the inside has this little indentation on it. You want it to be smooth on the other side. And I've already got a little bit of oil or water on here, so you can put olive oil or water. So I want to warn you, this stuff is kind of greasy when you're working with it, and that's okay. But then the second thing is that once you start mixing it, you have a very limited working time. It starts setting up probably within 2 minutes, and I mean really setting up. So you have no time to waste on this. So I'm going to get right to it and go very quickly. So you have to make sure that you've got everything nearby. Okay, so I'm going to scoot this stuff out of the way. Now I've got to make sure I've got enough of either. So when you put them side by side, you can kind of go, all right, yes, that's enough. All right, here we go. And you start mushing them together. And you want to work fast because you're trying to get them so that they are completely and equally put together. So this is going to be a little bit of a workout on your fingers for sure. So I feel like I'm almost done. Done this a few times. Now roll it into a ball very quickly, very quickly, very quickly. Set it down. Press it out a little bit so that you've got whatever size of a thing and a little bit of extra. Now I'm going to press it in here so that there's enough room around, and then press it in just a little. And now I'm going to press this down. Squish it. And the only thing that is a little bit limited about this is sometimes it wants to pull away from the edges just a slight bit. And when you're using this mold to make duplicates, you're going to probably need to do a little bit more cleanup. That's sort of the understanding when you're trying to do these, is you're always going to have a little bit of cleanup. So it's not going to be nearly as neat as the first object that you ever made. when you're making duplicates, there's always going to be some cleanup, some scraping off of some edges, or to deburr some of that stuff. So you should be able to pull this off of here. You know, you can kind of slide it off there. It's sort of on by suction. Now you just let it set up. And then when you're done, the way it will work is you will have this flat surface here, and you'll be able to take rolled up clay, and on an oiled mold, you have to make sure you put a little olive oil on there. So you put some on your finger, or you put a little bit on the end of a paintbrush, brush it onto this part, the whole part, and then you take some of the clay and you mush it in there, and then you would do the same thing. You would press this right on top, and you would let it ooze out the outside. This may take a couple of tries to get it right, because sometimes you put way too much clay in there and it goes a little too excessively outside the mold, and then you can't quite get a flat back. So you try it and get it so that you've got just enough clay so that it fills out the impression and it doesn't go much outside of it. Again, that's going to help with your cleanup, and I'll hopefully be able to do an example for you at the end of this. But I'm going to still let this set up, but it's pretty much set up, but I want to let it cure for more. So I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to now show you how to do a two-part mold. So two-part mold obviously is ideal for something that is three-dimensional. I have a bead here. I have a little skeleton that was a little cheap thing that I got at, I don't know, a jewelry shop long time ago. I love these little skeleton things. I've got so many of them in different metals and in plastic. So I've just taken the jump rings off and I've disconnected them, and I'm redoing the parts because I want to make them out of different metals. So I have a couple of these that I stuck inside here, and I have them as a two-part mold. So what you're going to need for a two-part mold is you're going to need enough cold mold. That's definitely a thing. You're going to need some broken up toothpicks, and I'll show you what those are for here in a moment. But I'm going to attempt, this is the one that I showed earlier, but I'm going to do this one right here. I still have this spoon intact here, so I'm going to only be getting probably up to about here. So this is going to take up, I'm going to have part of this sticking out for this mold. So you'll need your little toothpicks, and you're going to need those right away because those are going to go into the bottom part of the mold. So you're going to have one part of the mold first, and you're going to let that set up. Then you're going to oil it up and do a second part of the mold. You are also going to need something like an X-Acto blade or your needle tool, because you're going to need to make an alignment adjustment right in here so that they will line up. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to take a good amount of this cold mold here because this is a longer mold, so I want to make sure that I've got enough. I've been doing this, using this stuff for a good number of years, and it's taken some practice. I'll be honest. I haven't made the best molds of things, and so I have some stuff that's mistakes, that's for sure. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so I've got this nearby. Now I'm going to start. So working very, very quickly, very, very quickly, very, very quickly. As soon as I get this all mixed up, I'm going to roll it into sort of an elongated shape so that I can press it out.
So when you're mixing these together, it's just important to look at the color, because mixing it correctly means that there are no white streaks and you get this even color of lavender. 30 seconds or so of really quick mixing is about right before you start to set it down and then pressing your objects into it.
So now I'm going to press this, press this, press this. I can already tell that it is starting to set up. So now I'm going to set this in like this. And now I'm going to very, very quickly get these guys in here. You want at least 3, but 4 is okay. Just want enough. And then while it's still a little bit pliable, you can make a little bit of an indentation. So I had to kind of poke it in there and slice. So if you had an X-Acto would work well too, because then you could slice it and you could kind of fan it open just a little to make the split part just a little bit more. Now you let that set up. And we're going to just let that sit for a minute. So now this is done. And so I kind of like it. I think it looks good. But again, you're going to have to do some cleanup the next time that you get something in there. So you're going to take your clay. I'll make a little bit of a try and get enough clay here because, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error. So I'm going to work the clay a little bit. And you have to also be very careful when you're making molds of things. Any wrinkles that are in the clay to begin with, any wrinkles are going to show up. So you have to be very, very careful that everything is smooth before it goes into your mold. So you're going to press it into your mold. And I have like way too much here. I can tell there's way too much here. So if you want, you can kind of pull some of this away and work some more in there. And then make sure that you've got some water sprayed on this, and you can start doing this way. Now, this is way too much. This is way too much clay. I do not need this much clay here. And it kind of comes off with a little bit of slide. Now, I could do one of two things. I could start cutting away, but I could also let this dry. And sometimes you can get it so that it peels away, but other times it does not work so well. It's like I'm trying to peel it away. Now, like I said, you're gonna have to do a little bit of trial and error with this because it may work. Now, I'm looking at it and I'm going, all right, this is way too wet for me to attempt. So I'm gonna let this go. I could take a little bit of this away. Anything that you can salvage right now is helpful because then it's just less clay that you have to reconstitute later. So you can usually scrape it right off. And I'm going to start putting it back into where my other fresh clay is, back in the plastic. But then you can start kind of scraping off what was there before. Anything that's extra. Whew. All right. This one's not going quite so well, so I am going to mush this one down again. And I'm going to let that one dry. So you're better off, I would say, honestly, letting it dry. So there's this, the skate is underneath, and that's where the bale is. There's a little bit of smearage where some of the clay already came off of the parts that were unneeded. And I'm going to let it dry. So you can let this dry for a couple of hours. You can go and set it somewhere where it's warm. So now let's come back to this. This is the first part. So it is now set up. And what I would like to do now is make the second part. So now you can take these parts out here, and now you have these little indentations and you have a split. So the split is for orienting your two parts so that they will come together. And then also those little indentations here that the toothpicks made, those are going to be places where they will line up and lock in place. So you aren't going to get perfect impressions like this. The cold mold is not going to go completely down into these little holes here, but it will go close. And it's going to be enough for you to make a mold of something. I'm going to take this out. That made a really, really nice impression, but it's not very, it's very shallow in certain areas, and then it's deeper in others, which that is definitely a good reason why we should do a two-part mold on this one, so that I can get the whole entire thing. That's the hard part when you're trying to do a one-part mold, is getting it so that it is equally flat and everything is equal depth all around. So now I'm going to take more of this cold mold. This is one thing that you have to make sure that you do, and you have to do this without fail. You have to have some oil on here. So if you do not have oil, then what's going to end up happening is it's going to stick. And I made that mistake the first time that I did one of these. Put a little drop here. Now I'm putting it all over here. Keep the oil on my hands. Do I have an equal amount here? All right, yes. All right, so here I go. Super quick, lightning fast. Mix it, mix it, mix it. Mix it. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before, except I'm not going to need the toothpicks because the toothpicks already got taken care of. So now I just need a longer kind of a ball here. So now these all get laid out like this on top. And then I can take this. This is where I can make the split. And now you can just let this sit. You make sure that all of the parts that you did before are all pressed into the other part. So now you have a little sandwich. I have that sticking out, and now I let that one sit. So then when you're trying to do a mold of a two-part mold, it's the same kind of thing that applies. You have to be very careful about how much clay you use and not using too much. So I'm going to try using this. So I'm going to put a little bit of water. So I have my little fly mold here. And put a little mold here. A little bit of clay. And then I take my second part. Spray with water, and I make sure that my lining up is in place. And it's almost like you have a cookie with liquid filling. Looks like a macaron. All right. So you really squeeze this together because you're trying to get all of that extra clay out. So then this is where I will take it and I'll do some cleanup just immediately all around. And like I said, if you get this the first time, good for you, because this sometimes will take a couple of tries. This is definitely, like everything with metal clay, doing something in metal clay, you usually have to try it again, like roll it up and, and just try it one more time. So now you have the impression here, and the good thing is you know exactly where that impression is. Scrape off around. If I mess up, which I will likely do that here, I can always press the top part on one more time to kind of straighten everything out. But you have to also get all of this extra clay off. So you can use your needle tool to do this, or you can use the X-Acto. And you just continually get all of this off of here. And it's going to be a little bit of a messy job. So make sure you have your hands oiled when you're doing this. Otherwise it will get everywhere. And I will probably do one more impression here where I just press them together to make sure that I didn't distort the fly. I press them together a little bit more, and then I think the safest thing to do here would be to let it dry and then remove it from there. So this one I could probably remove. It's probably a little bit more set up at this point. But I also don't want to ruin it. So I feel like the safest thing would be to just let it be, and then you'll be able to come back around.
So when you take these out of the mold, this is what you end up getting. There's a lot of extra, and you will need to scrape all of that off of there. And that way, when you wrap it around, you've got all this extra that you want to, after it's dry, you're going to need to do some pre-finishing so that you won't have extra to do later.
And if you can see here, there's a lot of mold marks where I didn't clean it up the first time. But that is a very, very easy fix with one of these. You can just go through and you can get all of that burr off of there and clean it all up and clean it all up. If you are doing something that is a ring, you will want to, when you've got it like this, you will want to get it out of this mold while it is still relatively pliable, and wrap it around here. Because I've discovered once bronze clay has been fired, it's extremely rigid, and it is very, very hard to wrap around a mandrel when it's flat like this. If you were planning on turning it into a necklace, then that's perfect. But if you are trying to make it into a ring, you'll have to work pretty fast. It'll just take some trial and error to wrap the ring around and to get it so that either you're wrapping it around so it's offset, the ends are offset, or getting it so that this one is likely done. And so I am prying this open, and if I've used enough oil, which I'm pretty sure I did, whew, there we go. Now we have our two-part mold, and you should be able to get a decent looking spoon ring flat out of this. But again, take some trial and error and see what you come up with. Can't wait to see what you make.